I'm thrilled to introduce my friend, Sasha Sagan. Sasha and I we're COVID buddies. We met virtually on Twitter. We're also book buddies. We got to chatting, and I mentioned that her book, For Small Creatures Such as We, was at the top of my stack of to-read books, and she happened to be in the middle of reading The Founding Myth, and told me that she couldn't stop thinking, I won't tell the whole conversation that we had, but about Ben Franklin stealing God's power by harnessing lightning with the lightning rod. And the conversation devolved pretty quickly into some very heavy nerdery. We got into history and literature and science and Hamilton. It was very, very fast. And since then, you've been a regular guest on FFRF's programming, Free Thought Matters and Ask an Atheist. Liz Cavell and I first interviewed her for Ask an Atheist, and then again for Free Thought Matters, and then again for Ask an Atheist. She is an amazing speaker and writer and television producer and filmmaker. Her essays and interviews on death and history and ritual through a secular lens have appeared in The Cut, the Oprah magazine, Literary Hub, Atmos, and beyond. She regularly speaks on the ways that science can inform our celebrations, inspired in part by the work of her parents, who you may have heard of, Carl Sagan and Ann Druyan. They had a gift for inspiring with just beautiful writing, and it's very clear to me that they passed that gift on to Sasha. Her wonderful book, For Small Creatures Such as We, Rituals for Finding Meaning in Our Unlikely World, is a beautiful book. It's part memoir, part guidebook, and part social history, and it's one of my favorites over the last few years. I highly recommend it. Inverse also just named Sasha one of their Future 50, which is a group of 50 people who will be forces of good in the 2020s. And if you read her book, you will understand why. So please welcome Sasha Sagan.
Hi, good evening. Thank you, Andrew, for that only mildly embarrassing introduction. I'm so happy to be with you tonight. I feel like I should say I'm very pregnant. Just want to get that out of the way. But I'm not here to talk about the coming generation, but the generation before me. Tonight's honoree, later this evening, my wonderful, brilliant mother, Ann Druyan. She and my dad, the late astronomer and educator Carl Sagan, raised me with a sense of awe and wonder about the universe that you can also find in their many books and essays and the original season of the television series Cosmos that they wrote together and created, that my dad hosted. This sense of the majesty of nature and the beauty of it and the interconnectedness of life on Earth and how much there is to rejoice in nature as revealed by science is one of the guiding ideas in my life, and I'm so grateful to my parents for this concept that now seems somehow to be getting away from us, this idea that science isn't just a way of knowing things, but a source of deep beauty and understanding, and that it can be, we have this idea sometimes that facts are cold and hard and that science is so devoid of emotion, and I think that my parents' work contradicts that so beautifully in so many ways, and so many of us crave that feeling of being part of the grandeur and part of the majesty of the universe, and the idea that there's a way to feel those feelings and understand that deeply in the information in our DNA, the cells in our body, our place in the solar system, the information that we are able to glean almost every day, a new revelation that brings us deeper understanding of who and where we are. I think there's so much beauty in that, and so much of the profound understanding that we crave. And I'll tell you a little something about the way that I grew up and the stories that were passed down to me through my parents' elegant and colorful, beautiful storytelling. And one story in particular that comes from my mother and from her family that stayed with me powerfully from early childhood. Her grandparents were Orthodox Jews who came from Eastern Europe, and her father, Harry, was born in New York, and he lived to be 99. I knew him very well. He was one of the closest people to me, my grandfather, Harry. When he was a young man, growing up with the customs and traditions and beliefs of his parents, they were passed down to him carefully, and he got a little bit older, and he enrolled in college, the first person in his family to do so, and from Queens, he went into Manhattan to attend New York University. And you know how it goes when you go off to college and get cosmopolitan and skeptical, and this happened to him. And he started to question. And one day, he decided that he was going to have to tell his parents that he had had a change in his philosophy. And the way this story was told to me by my mother, I can picture it so vividly, getting on the train and that feeling of having just a lump in your chest when you know you have to have a difficult conversation. And getting home to their house and finding his father davening, praying, and waiting for him to finish, and his father looking up at him and saying, so happy to see you, what are you doing here? And Harry saying, look, I've got to tell you something. I'm not going to go to shul anymore. I'm not going to keep Shabbat. I'm not going to keep kosher. I'm not going to do all of these things because I don't believe. I don't believe in God. I don't believe in any of it. And his father, Benjamin, looked up at him and said, the only sin would be to pretend. And that idea of openness and welcoming a different philosophy and letting go of the sense of rejection and personal slight and forcing belief on someone else set Harry free. And he was able to be secular, which he was for the remaining 75 years of his life or whatever it was. And he and his father remained close. And this idea, this almost mantra, that the only sin would be to pretend, that going through the motions doesn't do anyone good, was so profound. And it was this idea that my mother, by telling this story and in the ways that our legends, our family legends, our all kinds of legends have to be retold to children in order to be remembered. I can picture hearing it, and it stayed with me as a real crystallization of the ethos of my family. The other phrase, the other sentence that stays with me powerfully as a perfect crystallization of a similar ethos is this one line that appears in the novel Contact. It's the only work of fiction that my father ever published, and he and my mom collaborated on the novel and the film, as they did with everything that they wrote in the 20 years that they were together before his death. And the line is, for small creatures such as we, the vastness is bearable only through love. And it's a line that my mom wrote. And this idea that, when we zoom out and see ourselves as this pale blue dot, as this tiny world against this enormous vastness of space, where we don't know if there's anyone else out there or anything else that happens after we get to spend a blink of an eye here. It's hard not to feel a little anxious, you know? There is a tightening in the chest that comes, and the existential crisis is something that, you know, many of us have to go through. But on the other side of it, once we accept the brevity of our time here and the mysteries unsolved about what else there may be, what do we have? What is the solace that we can find that is true and real? And I think that it's one another. It's that we're on this little lifeboat together at this moment. Against so many unlikelihoods, so many tributaries in history that could have gone another way, and still here we are in this moment. And I think that those deep connections, an appreciation for this moment and our place in this vast universe, the consciousness and awareness of being here at all is so profoundly moving. And for those of us who don't believe that there is anything else or don't claim to know that there is anything else, you know, there's often a sense of cynicism that can come. And I often talk about this idea that my parents were so good at teaching skepticism without cynicism and finding the joy and beauty of our place in the universe as it really is and as we're able to understand it, opposed to either, you know, leaning on things that are not substantiated by evidence or just letting the fear and the existential crisis take over. And finding that line, I think there's something so profound and so magnificent as we view ourselves as smaller, as our picture widens from our, you know, over the last few millennia, from our little communities to our world, to our solar system, and zooming out further to realize that our galaxy is just one of many, and that there is vastness in all directions that we can only begin to comprehend. I think that there's something deeply profound about taking solace in knowing that we're in it together. And those lessons bestowed to me by my parents are one of the reasons that I'm so grateful for them, and my mother is so deserving tonight of this honor. And also that, you know, for those of us who don't believe that everything happens for a reason, who do not believe that there is rhyme or reason, that there's a system in place to which, you know, the good guys will get their reward and the bad guys will get their comeuppance. I think that there is something, there is an impetus on us to make the world, to make the world more fair and more just. If we don't think that there is any other way for the things to even out fairly, I think that there is an argument that it's our duty to through this philosophy and through this way of seeing things, motivate ourselves to fight to make the world more fair, where maybe more of those things will happen, and there will be more evenness to how it all shakes out. And that's something else that my parents taught me, and I think that it is really an honor to be here talking tonight about my mother before she receives this award. And for those of you who don't know, I'm not really introducing her because there's going to be a song in between, but I feel like I want to say a couple of accolades about her. She and my dad co-authored 6 New York Times bestsellers. Everything that they worked on together, it's very easy for me to hear both of their voices braided into it and combined to create something more beautiful and more amazing than either one alone. And she was the co-creator of the motion picture Contact. She's an Emmy and Peabody Award-winning writer and producer and director of the second and third seasons of Cosmos. And she's just very newly minted honorary doctorate of the Free University of Brussels. She's just come from there. And, I feel just an enormous sense of pride for the legacy that she carries on and that she has created with my dad. And I think that there's so much of a sense of beauty and awe for the universe as it truly is, where we can look at a secular worldview, a humanist worldview, not just as a reaction to religion, but as something that is in many ways more ancient and more traditional, because if we go back far enough in human history, beyond the horizon of names of ancestors we know and customs that we, carry on, eventually all of us, no matter our backgrounds, no matter our ancestry, the most traditional, the most ancient rituals were looking up at the night sky, trying to understand where we were, sharing these moments together with our families around a campfire. This idea that understanding nature deeply as it truly is, and our sense of, for lack of a better, perhaps more secular word, our spirituality, our sense of awe and wonder at the grandeur, that these are separate, is something that my mother likes to call post-Copernican stress disorder. This, which is so brilliant, such a great way of thinking about it, that I think there is a way to find that feeling of our deep connectedness, and not forsake our understanding of science and our evidence-based view of the world, and go back to a perspective where those things were one and the same, and find the beauty and joy in that view of our tiny place in this grand universe. Thanks.
Ann Druyan and Carl Sagan had not just a great collaboration that we all know about, they also had a great romance. I wrote a love song that simply assumes the fact of evolution, and the first line of the song says, "Thanks to Galileo." But tonight I want to say, thanks to Carl Sagan for showing us our humble place in outer space. And thanks to Galileo, and thanks to Mr. Darwin for showing us the origin of the human race, which means that our precious romance is mainly the product of chance. And these feelings of love, so frenetic, are just genetic. It's only natural that I would want you. It's only natural that you want me. A million years of evolution had its way, so we can blame it on our parents' DNA. I move instinctively in your direction. Somehow you signal me to turn and see. You will always be my natural selection. as a voluntary choice, naturally. It's only natural that I would want you. It's only natural that you want me. A million years of evolution had its way, so we can blame it on our parents' DNA. I move instinctively in your direction. Somehow you signal me to turn and see. You will always be my natural selection. As a voluntary choice, you're my deterministic free will choice. As a voluntary choice, naturally. We first met Ann Druyan in 1997. It was, what was that, 24 years ago? And that was less than a year after Carl had died, and just a few months after the blockbuster movie that we heard about, Contact, based on the book that Carl wrote, and the movie for which Ann co-wrote the treatment. And as you've heard already, Sasha did a better job introducing her mom than anyone else could in the world, I don't think. But she is a Peabody and Emmy Award-winning writer, producer, director, focusing, of course, on science. And she wrote, of course, the original Cosmos series, along with books like Shadows of Forgotten Ancestors, one of my favorite books, really, Comet, The Demon-Haunted World. Is that the one that has the baloney detector in it? Yeah, or the baloney whatever. That's a great line. And she also served as the creative director of the NASA project to design the images, music, and ideas for possible alien civilizations that was placed on the Voyager 1 and Voyager 2 interstellar spacecraft. So someday, if some aliens ever do find that spacecraft and they see Ann Druyan's work on there, they're going to say, "Contact!" Or something in their own language, they will say it. So she also has co-produced the Cosmic Journey, Cosmos, A Space-Time Odyssey, and Cosmos Possible Worlds. And she has a companion book called Cosmos Possible Worlds. And you may not remember, Ann, but we were in Tampa in 1997. We were having dinner, and the waiter came and served me some coffee, and I said, "You know, coffee is my only vice." And you said, "It's not my only vice." And you had been working with NORML, right? The National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. And you served as their president for a while, is that right? And then you're still on their honorary board. And at that time in 97, I think there was only one state that had medical marijuana. Now what is it? Over 30, right? So progress can be made, and progress has been made. So Ann has been a guest on Free Thought Radio, on Free Thought Matters TV show last December. And 24 years ago, Ann received FFRF's Free Thought Heroine Award. Today, she's receiving our Emperor Has No Clothes Award. Of course, we all know that's inspired by the Hans Christian Andersen story of the honest and fearless child who saw the naked emperor and just told the truth. He's got nothing on. So Ann, come on up to receive your Emperor Award.
Well, first of all, I am humbled to be with this community, a community whose embrace of reality is so completely central, not only to, as Sasha said so beautifully, an appreciation of the romance of life, of the beauty of life, of its ancient continuity, of the need for us to stand up for life now at this crossroads. But also, it is so completely central to our survival as a civilization. What is called for? What form of human agency can save us from ourselves at this moment, when the destruction of our environment and our climate casts such a long shadow over our future? What is it, if not the fearless embrace of reality? What is it, if not the employment of an error-correcting mechanism which will give the highest rewards to those who prove our most cherished beliefs are wrong? This is what we need now. And how do we reach our fellow citizens and inspire them to embrace this perspective, this way of looking at things, this error-correcting mechanism which has the power to save us from ourselves? We know that science can deliver the goods. You can't lie your way to Mars. You can't get there. Every step of every spacecraft mission is something like 100,000 people deciding to tell the truth about what they're doing. And of course, there are redundancies and ways of preventing disaster if one fails. But it's a chain of trust that people believe that it matters what's real. And so, to be with this community that feels so strongly that we have to face squarely what are true circumstances in the universe, what existence really is, what the little we know about it. That's why it moves me so much to be here with you tonight and to receive this award, which I have to say I do not feel worthy of. There are others who've been given this award because they were willing to risk their very lives to tell the truth. Not me. All I did was follow my bliss. As Sasha so eloquently stated earlier, I had a loving family grandparents who had a totally different worldview than mine and my parents, but who did not believe in a God that was so weak and defenseless that they had to punish someone else for not believing in it. They actually did believe, which was the amazing thing. And that gave me a model of what it is that when a person really believes something, they are secure. They don't have to resort to violence or cruelty because they believe what they believe. And I honor that, even though that's not my personal belief. Because what I think is called for now is not just an adherence to reality, the kind of adherence that science demands, but also fearless acts of kindness and love. Because the basis of our disagreement with people who are traditional believers is not amenable to logic very often. I'd like to recall for you a kind of miracle, a secular miracle that Carl Sagan performed in the early 80s. He was asked to testify in one of the so-called creation science trials in the South. He was asked by the ACLU to be a friend of the court and to testify to the court, to bear witness why the notion of creation science was a kind of oxymoron. And he gave his testimony, and about a year later, he received a letter from the opposing expert witness, the creation scientist, who had been his opposite number. And this man had given up his job teaching creation science and gone back to school to become a biology teacher. I know, it was. And I can still recall his letter very clearly, although it's been so much, way more than 35 years since this happened. And what he said was, if you hadn't have been so patient and so thoughtful, and if you hadn't listened so carefully to what I was saying and taken my questions to heart the way that you did, with such humility and without any attempt to demean me or my beliefs, I never could have seen the truth of what you were saying. But you were so open-hearted to me that I felt I had to pay attention to what you were saying. And once I began to pay attention, I realized that my life was unraveling, that my belief system, that what I had completely staked everything I had on, was worthless. That's what's called for. It's not the haughtiness. We all know how good it feels to hate. We all know how good it feels to feel superior, to say to ourselves, to see that figure on television or online and say, I'm better than that person because my beliefs are so much better, because my identity is so bound up in those beliefs. But that's not what is going to grow our community. Sasha mentioned that I just came from Brussels, from the Free University of Brussels, which was founded in 1834 as a way for higher education to break the stranglehold of the church. And their motto is science vanquishes darkness. It's a thriving community. They know all about you. They know all about the Freedom from Religion Foundation. They were very excited that I was on my way here. And they asked me to tell you that they want to join with your community. It's an enormous university with more than a third of its student body coming from around the world, vibrant, young. And it was thrilling to address that group and to see all of the hope and conviction on the faces of these young, intellectually curious people. And so, what I'd like to suggest is that winning the argument is not necessarily going to get us where we want to go. That there is a need to embrace and to welcome and to talk positively, because I think that we have a better story to tell. We are talking about a continuity of life that's 4 billion years old just on this little planet. That's something so precious. We're not talking about a disgruntled parent who, in Diderot's fantastic formulation, loved his apples more than his children. We're talking about a family of life that includes every living thing on this planet. We have looked at other planets in the vicinity, just a few, just a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of the multitude. And to see them is to know how magnificent our little world is, and how worthwhile it is to fight for its future. So, thank you for this award. Ever since I was a child, I always loved the story of the emperor having no clothes, and the idea that it matters what's true, and that you should stand up and say what you see, what you know to be true. So I will try to be worthy of this wonderful award and your great kindness to me. And just like to say that, I think of myself as certainly one of the most fortunate people who has ever lived. I spent 20 years with Carl Sagan, who was as extraordinary in his capacity for love as he was in his genius, his intellectual prowess, his learnedness, his courage. So I feel like I've seen the best of us. And now you've all seen the love that exists between my beautiful daughter and me. What more is there, really, in life than such goodness? Thank you so much. Really honored.
Good evening, Ann. Good evening, Sasha. I'm pretty sure that the primary reason why the universe is expanding is to make room for Sasha Sagan's incredible talent. I read her book, For Small Creatures Such as We, a couple of months ago. I know that she comes from good DNA stock and genes, but for her first book, it's amazing.
Thank you.
I couldn't agree more.
Thank
My
you.
question is for both of you, but more pointed towards Anne, who I'm guessing that had a very hands-on editing relationship with one of my top 10 books, Demon Haunted World. I remember seeing Carl Sagan on The Tonight Show many years ago. But about 5 years ago, I read that after Carl would appear on Johnny Carson's Tonight Show, that he would go to Johnny's house for dinner afterwards. And since Johnny was an amateur astronomer, my speculation runs that after dinner, they would fire up a couple of joints, look through the telescope for billions and billions of stars. Did that happen?
Actually, the dinner happened, and it was wonderful, and but not the firing up of the joints back then. Strangely, we never smoked with Johnny, but I would love to tell a very quick Johnny Carson story, which is there was a high school teacher in Iowa who had a dream that every kid who graduated from public high school in Iowa would get a chance to look through a telescope. And after Carl died, this teacher called me, and he told me that Johnny had given 300 Celestron telescopes to the Iowa public school system. Didn't want anyone to know it was from him, and each one had a little brass plaque on it that said, "From a friend of Carl's." And he was a very, isn't that wonderful? He was a very passionate about astronomy and very curious. And my recollection of our conversations, the ones that I was lucky enough to be present at, was he would pepper Carl with wonderful questions about the universe. They were very stimulating conversations and hilarious, even though we never really got to light one up with him.
Hi, my name's Jessie Ramstrand, and I left this story for you, Sasha, on Twitter. In 1996, our physics functions class was watching Cosmos, and the quote, "If you wish to make an apple pie from scratch, you must first invent the universe," blew our minds. That night, I made 4 apple pies from scratch. And your father passed away. And the next morning turned into a memorial instead of a worship for your father. And I wanted to know what scientist quote brought you to love science that wasn't your father? Is there a quote out there for either of you that just kind of blew your mind in the scientific world, in books or in writings or in just scientific research?
Wow, that's an amazing story about the apple pie, and thank you for sharing that. The quote that jumps to my mind immediately is, I am a very religious non-believer. I'm paraphrasing, but it's something like, I'm a very religious non-believer. It's a somewhat new kind of religion. Albert Einstein, and that just really stands out to me as a very, that the concept, the paradox of a very, very religious non-believer, although I don't think it's necessarily so new. I actually think it's arguably the most traditional, most ancient way of seeing things, but that is something that comes to mind immediately.
I'm a tremendous fan of Charles Darwin. I'm kind of in love with him. And I love him, and I also love Michael Faraday, who was a fundamentalist Christian, who was so much of a fundamentalist Christian that, in fact, when he, at the end of his life, when he was asked if he wanted to be buried with Newton in the Canterbury Cathedral, he said no. He wanted to be buried in the Sandemanian sect cemetery, next to his beloved wife, Sarah. And his laboratory partner at the Royal Institution was one of the great atheists of the time, another scientist named Tyndall. And they worked side by side in very close quarters for decades with a kind of tremendous mutual admiration. And Tyndall was publishing what was for the time very kind of almost inflammatory indictments of religion and of a belief in the gods of the Old and New Testament. And yet they had this deep affection for each other. And of course, without Faraday, who couldn't do the math, just like me, and so whom I totally loved, it wasn't until James Clerk Maxwell came along and translated Faraday's brilliant insights about light and magnetism and the fields that surround us that were invisible and no one had realized existed until Faraday revealed them. Without Faraday, there would be no electronic media. And yet here was this man from another world, really, with a belief system completely different and almost antithetical, really antithetical to science, and yet so beloved and so humble. Without him, the dynamo, the motor, the basis of the Industrial Revolution never would have happened, and yet this was a man who didn't want a single patent on anything, because understanding a single cause of how nature worked was the greatest reward of all.
Name is Jerry Rampelt. Have you heard of Carl Sagan reenactors? In 1988, another adult and I took 10 teenage boys on a Boundary Waters canoe trip in northern Minnesota. And for 10 nights after we finished dinner, we would lie down on the ground and look at the stars with no ambient light, and they would compete with each other who could do the best Carl Sagan reenact from Cosmos.
Wow, that's amazing. No, I have not heard of that.
I'm so sorry I missed that.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Woody Kaplan. Besides Sasha continuing to improve the human race with your DNA, I actually was interested, but not that interested in what you've done. I want to know what you're going to do. What are you doing now, and what are you going to do?
Well, I would say this is the main immediate project, is right here. But there are a few things I have cooking that I would like to let get a little further down the road before I talk about them. But I will say this, one thing I really do dream of doing someday is writing a children's book about how you teach children to question and how children can learn to try to understand what's true. When someone tells you something, how do you parse out whether it's supported by evidence or not? So maybe someday I will get around to writing a really subversive children's book that no parent will want their children to read. But that is, as of now, just a fantasy.
Hi, my name is Lauren. Sasha, could you repeat that quote you attributed to your mother for small creatures such as we?
Oh, yes. The vastness is bearable only through love, is the rest of it. I mean, she wrote it. You could.
Hello, I'm Eva from Puerto Rico.
Hi.
Hi. What an honor. What a treat. Everybody knows that Contact was filmed at least partially in Puerto Rico at the radio telescope in Arecibo. I asked, did any of you ever go to the radio telescope during the filming or afterwards?
tragically no. The filming, Carl and I wrote the treatment for Contact in 1981, and we were motivated by the fact that at that time, there was a kind of snarky comment in the culture, which was widely heard, which was, oh, if women are so smart, where are the female Leonardos and the female Einsteins? And Carl and I set out, inspired originally by the story of Hypatia, which we told in Cosmos, and her murder at the hands of a mob of fanatical Christians. We were inspired to tell the story of a female scientist who got to go on the Great Odyssey while everyone else stayed home. And it took 16 years to actually make it into a motion picture. 3 directors, 3 different movie studios, and tragically, by the time it actually was becoming a motion picture, Carl was already ill, and while we spent time with Bob Zemeckis and the principal actors, it really was in the last months of Carl's life, and we were much more taken up with Carl's illness than we were with the actual production. So we didn't get to go to Arecibo, and I'm sorry to say I haven't been there since. It's a place, Puerto Rico generally is a place that really merits our attention and support. And in the last year, of course, as you all know, the majestic Arecibo Observatory sustained a fatal blow and is tragically no longer functioning. I would love to see our country step up for a part of itself, which is Puerto Rico, and support that community, as well as bringing the magnificent Arecibo telescope, one of the most beautiful sculptural creations on Earth, back to life.
Yes, it fell, it broke. There's no plans to rebuild it, but the movie Contact has it and took the most beautiful shots of it so we can remember it forever and remember the SETI project that gave so many people so much joy. And we're still searching.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Perhaps next time you could provide high-quality, frameable photos, pictures of that Cassini photo of the pale blue dot, along with Carl's, if lengthy, quote, and then do signatures on that. I would value that even more than an autograph book.
Thank you. Yes. You know what's amazing to me about Pale Blue Dot is that it has touched a chord in the hearts of people all over the Pale Blue Dot, more now than ever before. All of us recognize the truth of it, and I'd like to say that if it wasn't for Carl Sagan, Voyager 1 would never have taken that picture. He lobbied NASA for, starting in 1981, and then finally culminating with the actual taking of the picture in the early 1990s on Valentine's Day. And he kept going to NASA headquarters, and they would say, well, what's the scientific value of this picture? You know, if we turn the camera to Earth, the lens will possibly be fried by the sun. And they just couldn't understand, like, what's the value of this picture? And of course, it was the last of the 10,000s of pictures that Voyager was taking, having given us, with its partner Voyager 2, our first close-up look at the worlds of the outer solar system. That was a mere 20 years after Sputnik, the very first object we had ever been able to launch, and outside of the Earth's gravity. So in 20 years, we went from launching a bowling ball into Earth orbit to building 2 interstellar craft, launched in 1977, moving at 40,000 miles an hour every single hour since. And yet, still functioning coming on 42 years. 45 years. 45 years later, meant to work only for 12 years, and showing us not only the outer solar system for the first time, but the shape of the solar system as it moves through the galaxy. We still talk to these 2 Voyagers, built with less computing power than what you all have in your phones. You know, just think of it, with early 1970s technology, and yet still only 21 light hours and 30 light minutes from here, not even a light day from Earth. That's how big the universe is. Think of it. All of that hard traveling, and still not at all far from home. And so when I think of the Voyagers, I think of what an occasion for human self-esteem. We can do these very hard things. And if we can do those hard things, those mythic things of stepping on the moon and going to the stars, we can make this planet worthy of Sasha's future child.
Hi, I'm Sohan, MIT and in Cambridge and Secular Society of MIT. There have been talk recently and discoveries made about potential life on Venus, which actually Carl speculated about. And just wondering, he's been gone for a long time, sadly, and I'm just wondering what your thoughts are about what he might have thought about our discoveries of late, and maybe what he would have thought about those, and possibility of life elsewhere in the solar system, as well as I would be interested in knowing your own thoughts about, given our technology evolving and our discoveries coming in, your own thoughts about life elsewhere in the solar system. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this very stimulating question. Well, I think, tell me if I'm right, Sasha, but I think Dad would have been just hopping up and down with excitement about the James Webb Space Telescope, which will be launched a month from now, which will see so much farther than we have ever seen before. It's an order of magnitude if it succeeds, and of course, it's such a delicate and immense challenge. So many things could go wrong, but if it works, once it deploys, it will open up our eyes and enable us to see so much farther in space, but also so much farther back in time than we've ever seen before. It is a mythic achievement. Carl would have just been so thrilled. Think of the fire hose of discovery, of scientific discovery, that we are the recipients of every single day, he would have loved it. I think he would have been very pleased about the possibility, which is only a very small possibility, of life in the clouds of Venus. When he proposed this initially in 1961, and then with another scientist a few years later, it was the beginning of the ridicule that he received chronically for being so speculative. If you look back to the media of that time, now Carl is an iconic, beloved figure. Even NASA really loves Carl now. But at the time that he was working on these questions, they viewed him as, a kind of thorn in their side. And now, of course, he's beloved, but if you read the editorials and the things written about him at the time, they were so critical of his speculations, and yet the accuracy of his speculations has been extraordinary. He was very disciplined. He had that amazing combination of wonder and skepticism, and never one at the expense of the other. That was what made him so powerful, really, was his truthfulness, his curiosity. When Carl would debate people who had differences, beliefs that were different from his own, his ability to quote scripture and the sacred texts of all the world's religious traditions was so astonishing, because his curiosity was absolutely bottomless. He was fascinated by absolutely every aspect of human culture. And one of his great gifts to all of us was his belief that science was culture too. And it was a birthright for every single one of us. And if you want to aspire to have a democracy, then it can't be that the knowledge of a civilization built on science and technology is the property of a tiny priesthood. We all have to be informed decision makers. We all have to be able to weigh the evidence. And as happy as I think he would have been at the prodigious amount of scientific discovery, I think he would have been equally concerned, because, as many of you probably have seen online, his prophecy about this abandonment of logic and reason in the future, and a kind of entertaining ourselves to death, and an abandonment of the standards of evidence, that was his deepest fear. And we've all seen manifestations of that on a national level, the likes of which I had never seen before in my lifetime. So I think he would have been, I won't speculate about the question of life elsewhere, because I'm not qualified, and also because we simply don't know. And in the absence of evidence, we have to reserve judgment.
Hi there, my name's Nicole Shea. My 4 paramount values in life are love, learning, science, and life. And so when you think about each other, either as a mother or as a daughter, what are you most proud of for the person that you love?
Wow. I mean, I think that, so much of what I talked about tonight, to have, I'll tell you a brief story that it sort of goes along with this. When I was little, I was kind of peculiar and really curious about death, as I remain. And I had a lot of questions about it. And besides my secular parents, one other adult lived in our household, Maruha Farhe, who took care of me, was my nanny, and she had been a cloistered nun in the Andes Mountains before she became a nanny in Peru. And she left not at all because of crisis of faith, but she waited 2 years to get permission from the Vatican, writing back and forth in the 40s or 50s to the Vatican from the Andes Mountains to get the okay that she could leave without being excommunicated. And she really, true believer, went to church every Sunday. She didn't drive, so my mom or sometimes my dad would drive her and bring her back. And she was very open about her beliefs, and my parents, there was no censorship about that, and they really believed that my understanding of the world, my education would not be complete if I didn't understand what people believed in the religions of the world. And one day I went to my parents and I said, when you die, you know, Maruha says that you're with God in heaven, and you guys say that it's like you're asleep forever or without dreaming. Who, pray tell, is right? And my parents, in unison, joyfully, like without missing a beat, said, "Nobody knows." And that kind of like joyful exuberance about our understanding of how things are, and the willingness to always welcome curiosity, and to have long, difficult sometimes conversations about ideas. And, you know, from early childhood, when children are in the stage of asking, you know, why, all day long, you know, never discouraging that kind of curiosity. And you know, if I could ask a question to which they didn't know the answer, they were overjoyed. And, you know, looking it up together was such a sacrament, like a special, beautiful, holy thing to try to understand more. And I think that is one of the things I feel most gratitude for and most appreciation for, perhaps because now the shoe is on the other foot. I have a 4-year-old at home and this one coming, and I'm aware of how much you know, effort that takes and how difficult it is sometimes to have really complicated ideas understandable and welcoming and you know, safe enough for children to feel that they can ask them and honor their questions with real answers, and without sugarcoating things, but without making them terrified. So that's one of the things I'm most grateful for.
God, well, really, I mean, let me count the ways, you know, it really chokes me up to talk about Sasha and her brother, Sam, both of whom there's no one I've ever met on earth I would, you know, rather spend an evening with. The family that Sasha and her astonishingly wonderful husband, John, have built is, I guess, the greatest form of gratification. Their goodness to my parents and to me, it would be easier, like, I could think of a single time I was mad at her, you know, much more easily than I can enumerate a single thing that I appreciate. I mean, read her book, and you'll know the answer to the question, because I can't imagine as a parent having a greater sense of pride and feeling as loved as you make me feel.
Thank you. So nice.
So,
Emotional because I'm pregnant.
so it's after 9:30 and Anne is on Brussels time still here. And we want to know if you'd be willing to sign some books afterwards for a few minutes.
I would be honored.
And if you have a question, maybe come buy a book and bring it up to ask a question with.
You don't even have to buy one. You can just come up.
Just come up.
Just ask a question, really.
I don't want you to feel like you have to purchase one.
So thank you so much for being with us tonight. This has been just a wonderful.
Thank you so much. What a great evening.
You want to take this or do you want us to ship it?